Welcome to Brands of Value, the podcast about evergreen ideas and strategies in marketing and business. I am your host, David Göz, and today's expert is Alexander Schulze. Alexander Schulze is a manager at Vivaldi. Vivaldi is a marketing consultancy, and today we will discuss the topic of marketing as a strategic business function. Welcome to the show, Alex.
Hi, David. Thank you so much for having me. Really looking forward for the discussion. Hi.
Hey. So we decided to talk about avoiding the communication trap today. And in the next 60 minutes, we'll talk about how marketing can be established as a strategic corporate function and what things to avoid when doing that. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct. And I think it's a very interesting topic also for all the listeners in the field, because I think when we go through this, there might be a lot of things that people realize from their day-to-day life.
Now, Alex, this podcast is called Brands of Value. What does value mean to you?
Yeah. Very great question. And I think also one at the heart of the discussion we will be having today. I would say, from my perspective, it's important to at least separate two different perspectives on value in general. The one perspective being, of course, the business perspective, because all of us, at the end of the day, working in some sort of business environment. So from that perspective, I would say value is contributing to the overarching success of your company, making your company better off tomorrow than it is today. And this can take a lot of forms, providing the basis for success, for example, through superior insights. Really making your company more successful is probably one side of this question. And the other, of course, is then being a marketer, always the consumer and market perspective, really giving customers a benefit that exceeds some way the monetary value of the thing, of the service, of the product you're providing, which is always also not easy to answer. So to really define this, you really need to understand what is it that the customer values and how much value does he or she place into something. So here we're already talking about really having a good understanding about what drives the customer to be able to provide him or her with value.
Very interesting take. The value doesn't even have to come from a USP in itself. It could also just come from the marketing. Is that a take you also could agree to?
Yeah, definitely. I think when we talk about like the value for a customer, it can take a lot of forms. I mean, the most easiest form is probably something like an actual functional value. So it gets the job I want the product to get done in a good way, easy. But then there are a lot of emotional aspects and even social aspects. So when you think about the luxury market, a lot of this is signaling your status, or maybe it's just fulfilling your heart with joy when you have a product that you really resonates with you, and this doesn't have to be tangible. And then there is value in just being part of something that gets marketed in a good way. For example, feel yourself as part of a community, for example. And this is something that can definitely be established through superior marketing as well, or marketing communication in that way. Yeah, definitely.
Awesome. So you're a marketing consultant or marketing management consultant at Vivaldi Group. Could you tell us a little bit more about how that role makes you uniquely qualified to talk about avoiding the communication trap and strategic marketing, or marketing as a strategic corporate function?
Yeah, it's quite a mouthful. So yes, happy to do so. And maybe before talking about Vivaldi in particular, I've came across a lot of different roles in my previous career, if you will. So I've been working on the agency side. I've been working on the corporate side in sales, even the really hands-on side of marketing, if you will. I've done a lot of work like in innovation field. So I've seen quite a bit of the industry, I would say. And currently I'm working at Vivaldi. And I guess most of the listeners won't know Vivaldi. We are a global boutique consultancy for growth strategy, brand strategy, marketing, innovation, transformation, all of those are very interesting topics. And I think the interesting bit here is, after having seen so much of the execution side, like in the agency environment and so on, the perspective I've gained here at Vivaldi is a lot about aligning marketing as a function, aligning marketing as a way of market-oriented strategizing with real business impact. And the sort of project we are doing here are quite different from projects you see in an everyday agency, because it's very much focused on delivering actual business impact through marketing, through market orientation, and by creating, for example, superior value propositions. And I think that's a unique perspective of Vivaldi, to really always bringing back to the actual market impact and the strategic impact for a company.
Could you give us an example of something without maybe naming one if you don't feel comfortable.
One case I always love to refer is we've been working with a global sports nutrition company. It's, I guess, 2 years ago or something. And they were really struggling with securing market share in the German market, particularly with German Gen Z, so young people. And it all started off as some sort of research inquiry. So who is the Gen Z in Germany? What drives them? How can we win those people? How can we convince them? And how is it different than any other global market that we are already successful in? And that started almost with a very strong research focus, and we did a lot of target group segmentation, customer journey mapping, and then step by step started to really shaping out a strong value proposition, of course, at the heart of everything, which then, and that's, I think, where it gets interesting, which then got translated, of course, into communication, but also into new service concepts, even a new sales program, inclusive of a new incentive structure for the sales force, if you will. And because we really learned how German Gen Z in that sense is a bit different than other global target groups. And we really translated this into the heart of the company, being really the sales approach, the go-to-market approach. And it was way more than just adding another layer of communication on top of it, which is always also important, sure. But I think it's always greater to have this impact throughout the whole go-to-market approach. And in this case, also particular, also in the sales side of business.
Let's get to the topic of this podcast, which is basically saying marketing shouldn't just be seen as a project or as some sort of side thing that you do, that you have to do, that maybe, helps the salespeople, but that marketing is actually a really strategic function of business and
Yes.
a necessary function of business. And that we really need to think about it that way. What sort of observations do you make in the world out there about the role of marketing in business?
All of this, at the end of the day, comes down to infusing market orientation, infusing understanding of the customer into all of the strategic decision making. And it's quite a challenging endeavor. It's not easy to do. It has a lot of different facets. It's complex, sure. And it should provide a strategic framework, a strategic foundation to really drive business success through market orientation, and then get in practice. Typically, it should get translated into the 4 Ps, for example: product, promotion, place, and price. And that's like the most traditional perspective that you can have on that. But funny enough, even this falls short to what you see in practice, because what you see in practice is not every marketing executive, but a lot of marketing executives you see in practice, they are so much focused on communication. They are so much focused on executing good communication, which is important and which is, of course, part of the business. But you find yourself as a marketing executive often in a situation where you're just like mainly managing marketing communication. You're delivering on very tactical KPIs, and this leads you in a place where you are somewhat disconnected from actual decision making, and you're like just chasing the next tactical operational KPI, and by doing so, losing sight of what is actually helping the business. And I think that's really sad, because I think marketers are great in delivering value beyond that. And I think it's a cornerstone of every company to be market oriented and to understand what drives their customer and potential customers. And somehow we lost that a bit, I guess, as a function, as a discipline.
Would you say that marketers have become too muddled in the tactics of marketing rather than thinking about it strategically?
Of course, it always depends. I mean, there are a lot of really strategic marketers that are doing an excellent job, sure. The discipline, from time to time, I have that experience, yes. I have the feeling like we are talking so much about campaigns, we are talking so much about new social media channels and so on and so forth. We're talking so much about creativity itself, which of course is relevant, and it's a huge driver of success as well, sure. But I have the feeling, if I'm just following like the discourse on LinkedIn, for example, it's a lot about communication. It's not so much about doing the actual, for example, research work, building a solid portfolio strategy, for example, or something. But it's very much focused on communication. And I think we should be able to do more than that. I mean, we are definitely. And I would wish to make this more visible also in the discourse, in the discipline as well.
I totally agree with you on that aspect. One professor from the University of Hohenheim, which you went to, I saw in the LinkedIn profile,
yes, right.
Actually had a really interesting article about that. He said that the function of marketing has gone so far in the direction of focusing just on communication that businesses started putting the old functions of marketing, the 4Ps, into areas like new business or growth, and founded new departments to fulfill these functions that once were held by marketing. And
yeah,
do you see that in practice as well?
Totally. And that's so funny because everyone in the business world would agree that marketing as a function is very important. Like having the right price, having the right product, having the right go-to-market. So everyone agrees on that's really important for our business success. Marketing as a department, not so sure. Because marketing as a department today, it's often, just as we said, a lot of executing communication, and all of the other aspects, they get like distributed across the company. And also when we look at Vivaldi, when we see who we are collaborating with on client side, it isn't always the CMO or the marketing department. It can come from a lot of different sides, and it can even come from the corporate strategy department. And they are starting to talk about the right product, the product market fit, right pricing strategy, and so on. And all of these traditional marketing functions and marketing aspects, and all of those things, young marketers also learn at university. They somehow got taken away from the marketing department almost. And again, of course, not everywhere, but more and more. I also get this impression that this happens a lot in practice.
For example, I had a subject called integrated communications at university, which was all about ensuring on different levels of thinking that the marketing efforts are aligned. But it mostly talked about communication. So it was all about not changing your logo too quickly, and lots of examples of that, ensuring that your previous message doesn't clash with your current messaging. So it's the time aspect of it, obviously making sure that your corporate design is followed and all of these aspects. But maybe there's a case for thinking even larger and saying, hey, maybe it shouldn't be integrated communications. Maybe we need to think about integrated marketing again, and how to incorporate the brand message across all platforms.
Yeah, I love that. And I mean, I think that's a very good example. And somehow it almost feel like all of the really fundamental strategic stuff of marketing, it almost feel like this is too boring for young practitioners, for example, because they like to involve themselves in all of those. How can we make the communication 1% better? How can we optimize this or that channel? Yeah, starting to neglect the actual integration with the business. And that's what marketing is for at the end of the day. I mean, marketing is not here for creating art or the most creative assets out there, but really to support the company in fulfilling its goals.
I totally agree. After Cannes this year, Mark Ritson repeated his talk from Cannes lines online afterwards, and I watched it, and it was really interesting because he basically said, hey, it's awesome that there's a festival for creativity in marketing. Cannes is all about celebrating creativity, and creativity is a huge aspect in ensuring the success of a marketing campaign. But he went through all of the aspects that also go into marketing, and in the end, he came to the conclusion that that creativity in marketing is only about 5% of the deal, and that there's all of these other aspects and factors that go into ensuring the success of marketing and of a marketing campaign. Yeah. What's your take on that?
Yeah, I agree somewhat. I would maybe phrase it a little bit different, because I think the 5% maybe, I mean, it's always hard to argue about percentages, but I guess what he's saying is, of course, creative communication is just one bit of it. That's the notion I would agree with. I think when we talk about creativity, I think we would do ourselves as marketers a favor if we would talk about creativity in a more broader sense. Because I think if you look at strategy itself, if you even look at research, for example, there's a lot of creativity going in there. So coming up with a really thought through research plan, having a really good way to find out surprising and relevant consumer insights, it's also a lot about creativity. It's a lot about understanding how to ask these sorts of questions, how to get the participants of a survey to talk about a given subject, for example. And even if I look at the studies we are doing for different clients, it's always so much fun to just watch the different research teams and watch how what sort of creative approaches they came up with for different business questions. And there's a lot of creativity in there. And I think that's also something that's pretty unique to marketing practitioners in general. I think they are quite creative. Not all of them in the communication field, sure, but in other fields, definitely. And I think that's a big asset for marketers to bring in some fresh perspectives, some fresh approaches into strategic decision making, into research, into even having the strategic dialogue internally. There's so much room for creativity, and that sort of creativity, I think, has always also a place in marketing and is always important, also in the parts of the disciplines that is not about communication. Mm-hmm. If that makes sense.
Yes, it does make sense. Do you feel like there's a lack of process within that whole idea? Do you feel like people don't even know how to go about integrating marketing as the full piece across a company?
That's a tough one, actually, because looking at the client side, what we see a lot in our day-to-day consulting life, there's no shortage of processes. And in theory, there's a lot of processes, there's a lot of governance in place and so on. I have the feeling from time to time, important aspects of the process get lost between the departments. So you have like one silo that is really focused on just putting out great communication. Then another department in a whole nother area of the company is working on product innovation. How can it be that those departments don't talk to each other? Why don't they share their insights, for example? And then you have a whole nother team working on the pricing, for example, often very close to the CEO, because the impact on the bottom line of pricing is pretty straightforward, and it's just very scatterbrained across the organization. And somehow, although all the processes are there, I guess it's a problem of managing the interfaces in a good way and having one person integrating all of this. And in my perspective, a CMO would be best suited for doing something like this, just integrating all of the market-oriented functions. They don't have to sit under marketing at the end of the day, but still they need to be integrated into this process.
Do you see that in reality, CMOs are often, how to put it, put on the bench of communications and not allowed to dabble in the other aspects of marketing?
I guess they are such and such, because I've worked with some CMOs that were like really obsessed with communication and that did a very amazing job in creating campaigns, really also responsible for turnarounds. So you can definitely have a campaign, a communication plan that helps you turn around a brand. Definitely, there are situations where something like this happens, and that there are places and times where this is appropriate. And there are a lot of CMOs that are like this. And then on the other hand side, I also have worked with some CMOs and similar that almost didn't care too much about communication at all, but were really focused on like the bigger level strategic thinking about expanding, for example, internationalization, unlocking new markets on a regional base, advancing the product portfolio and so on. And they were really closely aligned with the CEO and also the CFO. And you have both, I would say. Maybe there aren't many that are like in the middle ground that can do both ends very well. I mean, probably there are some, but these are probably the exceptions. But I guess it's both. But what I would say maybe, and maybe that's just a filter bubble thing, but probably CMOs focused on communication, they might get more visibility in our media, maybe. So maybe on LinkedIn, it's easier to brag with a campaign than with the optimization of a product portfolio, I guess. So that could be the case, I guess.
So would you say both in the media and online and internally, there's maybe the wrong incentives so that the whole integration aspect is less well done?
Yeah. I mean, yes, probably. I guess it also comes down on, first of all, the ambition. Because not everyone wants to be like the big strategic integrator, for example. A lot of CMOs or SVPs or whatever, they're totally fine with just delivering amazing results on the communication sides. And this is, I mean, I don't want to talk anything bad, because this can also result in very good impact, very good business impact. So the first thing is really, is there even an ambition to play this role? Because secondly, I guess it's just very hard. There's a lot of like politics going on in a corporation. And to be fair, also, of course, when you are new to an organization in particular, there are already legacy processes in place. There's already some sort of internally known role of marketing. And to change this is really hard. And that's also, I mean, that's one of the key questions and key challenges of new head of marketings and CMOs is almost like positioning marketing internally. And it takes a lot of work. It takes a lot of work that is not, per definition, part of your scope right now. So it's extra work. And then it also takes a lot of lobbying and networking internally. You need to talk to all of your stakeholder internally, and you need to convince them almost that you can deliver value beyond the communication. And not everyone wants to do this, and not everyone maybe has even the time and the strength to push through this, because this can be very hard.
I can totally imagine that coming into existing structures is very hard. But isn't that where most of the time you then come to Vivaldi, for example, and say, hey, I've got a problem here. Can you help me establish that across the company, or can you help me solve or fix that sort of issue across the company?
Yeah, that's funny enough, because yes, some of our engagements are like this. And also, to be perfectly clear, that's not only a problem the marketing department is facing, but we had also projects, for example, with finance department or a procurement department with similar challenges. Because, I mean, after the years, there are some expectations that were built regarding your department, and you're just muddling through all of the operational demands that you are facing from all your stakeholders. And you just don't have the time or the headspace to think about what's the actual strategic ambition of your department. And what we are doing there often, it's like just basic marketing work almost. It's like just starting with the clients, if you will. So interviewing the internal stakeholders, finding out what is important for them, how can we support them, how do they perceive us, maybe even compared to other internal departments, and then just aligning this with what are we actually doing, what are we spending our time on. So what is our team doing the whole day? Does this align with all the things that is expected, or all the things that could provide value for our internal stakeholders? And then next question, do we even want to stand for that? Do we want to stand for something else? And do we need to explain to our internal business partners that we can bring in much more value also to them if we would change our focus a bit? And then again, it's a lot about like almost internal brand building. You build cases, you create lighthouse initiatives, for example, maybe collaborate with, in the case of a marketing department, you could collaborate with the sales department, for example, and have one great lighthouse case where you're just like increasing the conversion rate, for example, fueled by your superior market knowledge. And then you start lobbying for this, and you're gaining relevance, you are winning the seats at the table where all of the strategic decision making happens. But it takes really time. It's like it's almost like a repositioning and then a brand activation internally for something like a marketing department, or in any other cases, like in a finance department or something. Yeah, and that's part of our work, at least, yes. Yeah.
So let's imagine you're a little company or your startup. Maybe you can't afford Vivaldi, or you're like at the very start of building a company. How would you go about ensuring marketing is a strategic function of your business, and what steps would you take?
Yeah. I mean, that's a very fair question. And I mean, it's always also important to sort of be humble about this, because of course, not every brand and every company can go all about this and create like fully fledged service. I think on a very fundamental level, it's a lot about understanding your needs internally and also externally, and becoming the expert for your customer. What I mean by that, maybe you just start by asking your go-to-market team, ask your sales team, ask your product development team, ask them what sort of customer insights would be helpful for you to improve your approach, to improve your product development, and just understand what is the actual insight need, and what are like areas that I could jump in and provide value for all of my peers internally. And you can also, if you don't want to go out and talk to customers already, you can also talk to experienced industry friends, or maybe talk to your sales force and ask for their experience with the customer, talk to the people that are the very closest to the customer. just get a very general understanding about what are the specific market drivers in your market. What are the boxes you need to take with your product offering, with your service offering, with your price positioning, also, of course, with your communication, and just try to understand it. And then whenever you can, of course, you need to involve customers. And this doesn't have to be as professional as some consultancy like Vivaldi would do, because of course we would run like a representative survey and do some quality research and so on. But at the very beginning, just having some conversation with customers or with customers that you have lost or with potential customers, and then just ask them, can you talk me through your decision-making process? What was the moment that made you realize that we might not be the best partner for you? And how did you decide on the final offer that you've chosen? It can already build so much insights. And if you have those insights, everyone loves to have you in the discussion, because the moment you can provide the rest of the team, the moment you can provide the strategic leadership even with insights from the actual customer, then I would say almost automatically you will gain relevance internally, and the role of marketing grows internally, because it's so much value to just have the understanding of what really drives the market, really drives the customer.
So this asking the customer what they want and what their problems were, that's what you call market orientation, right? Or would you say there's a different definition for it?
It takes a lot of forms. It's definitely one part of this, really understanding the customer. And also doing so in a methodological, smart way. So I think there's a lot of research out there. There's a lot of very operational research where you're just optimizing on an A/B test level some sorts of assets. I'm not so much talking about this, but just understanding what drives differentiation in the market. What are, for example, points of parities, points of difference? What are aspects that really can strike the difference for my brand to be chosen over a key competitor? So this is one big part of market orientation, understanding the customer. Another part is, of course, understanding the industry as such. Are there any new trends? What are competitors doing? How are they competing in the specific market drivers we want to compete in? And just understand how this comes together. So there's also a lot about being aware of competition, being aware of new competition as well, and understanding also the broader environment. So I would count all of this under market orientation, but getting a good understanding of the customer is probably one of the cornerstones of this notion.
Thank you, Alex. Could you maybe summarize the points or the order of steps you would take if you wanted to establish marketing as a strategic function of your business?
Yes, happy to do so. And I'm very glad that we already touched on so many aspects of this, because it's just so much to talk about. But on a very high level, I would say it's, I'm a consultant. That's why, of course, there are 3 steps to it. It's always 3. The first step is really understanding your situation in a strategic context. So as a marketer, understand what is your current role. So what are like the KPIs you are delivering on? What is your contribution to the business strategy? What do the other stakeholders internally expect from you? And also, what do they need? What are like inside needs your organization is having? That's like the first step. And then the second step would be understand your market. Build an insight base, talk to customers, quantify as much as possible, quantify your target group segments, quantify the decision-making process, and tailor it down really to the inside needs of your company. So not just compile a lot of research and then just throwing it over the corner, but really make it actionable. Tailor it to the questions at hand. One example I always like is, for example, a persona for sales department, for sales, very much different than a persona for product development department, for example. Mm-hmm. Tailor this insight base to the insight needs of your organization. And then last but not least, do the work. Execute, create business impact. So create lighthouse initiatives, lobby for your work, talk to your stakeholders, implement first projects, and then making the scene across the company. I know this is always a bit hard, because nobody wants to be like the sales guy rallying around his achievements or her achievements. But I think that's also part of the job to also make your impact seen and make seen how much you can contribute beyond the pure execution of communication to the overarching success of your company.
Awesome. Do you think politics is actually a big part of that?
I guess so. And I think this doesn't have to be a bad thing, because politics at the end of the day often comes down to everyone has a very specific perspective and sees a very distinct aspect of the business. And just by, if you will, by discussing all of this and by having these internal relationships and network, only by doing so, you can gain insights in all of the other areas that you have not seen before or where you don't have enough insights yet, if you will. So I think it all comes down to aligning priorities, creating mutual understanding for each other. And this doesn't have to be negative. It's just really to also here understand each other and understand how you can provide value again for the other people in your company. Because at the end of the day, I think that's the thing everyone wants to achieve. Everyone wants to get better a bit. Networking is part of that in the form of understanding each other, understanding how you can contribute also to the success of other people in the company.
Great. With that process, there's obviously often quite a lot of barriers as well. What are the main barriers that you encounter? And could you give us an example of how you maybe help the client overcome that barrier?
Yeah. I mean, there are probably plenty of barriers, and it's always very different depending on the actual client situation, of course. One common theme that we often encounter is just being overworked, just having so much stuff on your operational plate. And I mean, that's something that from the outside, it's always easy to underestimate. But the reality of someone working in a company and having some sort of strategic marketing role, there are just so many tasks that are on your table. And there are also so many ad hoc requests, so many unforeseen incidences where you just need to jump in and solve something very quickly without having the time to think it through enough and find the perfect solution, but you go with what works now is best for now. So it's really a lot about creating room and creating the space to think about this in a strategic manner and to even find the arguments that you can use for example, for increasing your headcount. Because to get more resources, for example, you of course need to make the case why this is important and why this is beneficial also for the company. As a consultancy, there are many forms how we can help something like this. But often I think just providing a safe process, like for example, we're going to look in the competitive field for the next 2 weeks. And while doing so, we will also talk with some customers in the week beyond that. And then we will just have a workshop that brings all of the internal stakeholders together in one room. And then we force you to talk with each other. And we force you to talk with each other for 4 hours. And we will provide some frameworks that will force you to come up with a solution. As simple as this sounds, it's often so beneficial for client situations and I mean, I can definitely feel that you might be completely overwhelmed with all of the operational work, but just having a partner that takes you at the hand and that have a successful, proven process and guides you through the creation of a strategy, for example, is already so helpful for a lot of them because of course they are smart. Of course they can come up with the right solution. And of course they have all of the knowledge of their industry, definitely more knowledge of their own industry than we are having from the outside. Often what is lacking is just like the room, the process, and someone who is sort of almost forcing you to go through the process. And I think that's one value that we often provide. And it's always really fun to see how happy clients are also after having such discussions, having such workshops or such discussions, because you can really see how much fun they are having as well, because I mean, everyone likes to do this stuff of work, I guess.
Now we're currently in a stagnating market in Germany, in most areas at least. What would be the case to start integrating marketing as a business function right now?
Efficiency. I mean, funny enough, a lot of our projects nowadays, they focus on efficiency. Of course, not in a way of we are reducing headcount or something. That's some sort of work we are not doing, but we are really focused on the growth side. But having a well-functioned and market-oriented strategy in place saves you so much money. It saves you so much work time because you are able to provide a clear guidance, a clear strategic guideline on what you need to achieve, what are like the important boxes you need to tick with your market and do the right things. I think that's often a case, an efficiency case. So by understanding what's the important bit of the business and the important bit of the market drivers, for example, you also understand what are the areas where you don't need to focus, where you can maybe free up some budget or free up some internal workload focus, if you will, and focus on the things that are really driving business impact and revenue at the end of the day.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Alex. Let's get to some little closing questions.
Yes.
First of all, is there anything we haven't talked about yet that you really want to mention?
Actually, no, I think I really like the discussion so far, and I think we've touched upon all the important aspects. I mean, maybe one thing I wanted to highlight, although I'm sure it didn't came across like this, but I also wanted to make sure, of course, doing great communication and putting the effort and being just like executional on doing great executional work is so important as well, of course. And I'm of course not suggesting that we should move away from doing a great job at execution, but I think there's just so much more to add value on. But I think that also came across, I guess. I hope.
So if people want to read up on this whole topic, are there any sources that you can recommend?
I'm a huge podcast listener. So for me, it's like all of the classic marketing podcasts, like Marketing Today, for example. Of course, also your podcast, some self-promo here. But just, I would say, staying in touch with the current discussion of the discipline and also having a broad perspective. There are a lot of good podcasts on this. There are a lot of like people to follow on LinkedIn, maybe on Twitter if you're still there. But also, and this might sound nerdy, but just have a good management of Google Scholar notifications and keep up to date with the research that is coming out, because that's also a great source of inspiration for me personally. And also, even if you just read the abstract of some of the articles, there's so much value to get from that. So yeah, just building a good content filter for yourself, if you will. And yeah, have a broad perspective on the topics, I guess.
Now we're coming to the end of this show of Brands of Value, and I always ask my guests, what's the last time you felt like a company went out of their way to provide you value?
Yeah, I know. I didn't know that this question would come. Still, I found it a bit hard to find a really good answer. So I will pick something that, after some consideration, I think is a fair pick. And that would be Rune. Probably most listener won't know Rune, but Rune is like an audio media server, if you will. It is mainly targeted at people that are really invested into audio equipment and into good sound systems and so on. And it's a bit technical. I don't want to go into that, but what it does, it is, or at least how it provides me value is, it is so amazing in curating music. So it is amazing. It just analyzes your music, but not in a way that Spotify or Tidal or Apple Music is doing, but on a minute by minute base. How much do you listen to that and that artist? What are the points where you drop out? And then it builds not only a recommendation engine, but almost like a personalized magazine for you, where it recommends like something that might be worth for you to look into, and some backstories even about some records that you love and so on. And this was really amazing for me, because I love hearing music, of course, but I'm always struggling with keeping up with everything and discovering new music, and somehow Spotify and Tidal just don't do the trick for me. And I was so much intrigued by Rune because it's doing such a great job. And despite the original purpose of Rune, or the original use case for Rune is having an internal media server and having multi-room audio system, I have none of those. But just for the functionality of providing this discovery function and some context, it was amazing for me. And it's a bit nerdy, but I love it.
Awesome. Now, we've talked about really interesting topics. We've talked about how marketing maybe isn't seen so much as a corporate success function currently, and how that's a problem and how that creates inefficiencies, what the role of CMOs is within that. Then we talked about the process of how to go about it and what sort of barriers you can maybe encounter and how to overcome them. That's something that is at the core of what you do at Vivaldi. Where do you want to send people if they want to learn more, or if they want to connect with you and get into discussion?
Yeah. So, I mean, firstly, of course, you can always check our website and just Google Vivaldi Group. It's not the best name from a SEO perspective, but Vivaldi Group is the way to go. You find a lot of good thought leadership pieces from us, also in the realm of AI, of course. So I think that's a good resource to look into, also for inspirational cases. And then otherwise, also happy to connect on LinkedIn. So just reach out to me, Alexander Schulze on LinkedIn. Just send me an invite and let's have a chat. I mean, I always love connecting with people and just hearing their situation, their company, the problem that they are facing. And I think it's always the best way to learn. It's just like the discussion, talking to people, and have a quick chat and let's see.
Thank you, Alexander Schulze, and thank you to our listeners for sticking with us until the end. Goodbye.
Thank you so much. Goodbye.